Well, joining us for more on next steps for Alberta, maybe a different approach to the use of the referendum tool, something I know the Premier is looking very closely at. Very pleased to welcome to the program Dr. Ted Morton, Professor Emeritus at the School of Public Policy, or Executive Fellow, rather, at the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary, and of course, former Minister of Finance, Minister of Energy with the province of Alberta. Ted, so great to have you with us here. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Rob. Good to be with you again.
I mean, to what extent are you surprised, if you're surprised at all, just the way the federal election went, the way Alberta voted compared to the rest of the country, that we're seeing these conversations, we're seeing this frustration, this discontent right now?
Well, I was shocked. I mean, 12 months ago, 6 months ago, the Conservatives still had a 20-point lead in popular vote. That all changed in 6 weeks. And he wasn't beaten by the Liberals and Carney. He was beaten by Trump. It was a whole new set of issues. So deeply disappointed. But again, on the other hand, I think it proves again that in a certain sense, Western Canada is basically irrelevant to the Liberals putting together a majority government. I think they got three MPs out of Saskatchewan and Alberta combined.
Yeah.
And they're 170 MPs. 2/3 of them are just from Quebec and Ontario.
Early signs of Mark Carney is different from Justin Trudeau, but I don't know, different enough? What do you make of what we've seen so far?
Well, he's much smarter. He obviously understands economics and finance much better than Justin. That's not much of. No, he's had an amazing career, but he's certainly in the last decade or more, really 2 decades, he's been pretty deep green, putting the environmental issue at a high level in terms of finance and development. And that, of course, was a big part of the Trudeau legacy. And which did real harm to Alberta and to Western Canada. Well, to all of Canada. We almost have a lost decade under Trudeau, but it was particularly hard on Saskatchewan and Alberta, the primary oil and gas producing provinces. So I've taken a wait and see attitude, give the new guy the benefit of the doubt. I think Premier Smith is doing that too. Carney tends to say the right things, but you and I know that talk is a lot easier than action.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, he was doing that just a few days ago at Stampede, and same with his energy minister.
He was learning to flip-flop pancakes.
Yeah, that's right. But in terms of, I mean, not just your advice to him and his government, but to the rest of the country, like how seriously should they take Alberta concerns, Alberta frustrations, and in the mood right now especially?
Well, I think they should, but how serious they take it, I think, will depend on how Premier Smith handles it and what this referendum goes. I think a straight up or down referendum on separation, a yes, no, I don't think that'll have much effect because at the most it would get 20%. And that would send a message to Carney and the rest of Canada, well, Alberta's not leaving. At that, the risk there is, of course, that 20% decides, well, 20% is enough for a new party, so they form a separatist party, and that could spell very bad news for Premier Smith and the Conservatives because you get back into vote splitting. But as you know, I've proposed an alternative approach to sort of a two-question referendum, if you want to get into that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's talk about what that might look like, because I know the Premier's open to maybe different referendums on different issues, not just the independence question. Or how could she go about it, do you think?
Well, I saw her briefly at Stampede, and she's interested in, I think, in the two-question referendum. And the example of this is New Zealand did it a couple of decades ago. They wanted to change their electoral system. And the first question is, are you satisfied with the status quo? Yes or no? And then if there's a no vote, then the second question is, which of the following alternatives would you favor? In that case, it had to do with change in electoral system. And there was 80% support for change, and it led to a new electoral system for New Zealand. But in our case, the problem with the straight up and down, succeed or no, is that there'll be 20% of the people that would maybe separate in Alberta. There's 20% that are happy with the status quo, but I think that leaves the majority of us, 60%, that we're not happy with the status quo, but we don't want, there's a big space in between those two alternatives. And with the two question referendum, are you satisfied with the status or happy with the status quo? No. Then question 2, you could start out a list of possible alternatives from some of the policy changes that Premier Smith and Moe have requested, to structural changes like the Fair Deal Panel, policing, tax collection, pension, I guess the furthest end would be, I guess there could be sovereignty association, the Quebec model, or complete. But that would give, I'd say, the 60% of us that are kind of in between the two extremes a voice. And I guess I'd be curious to hear from you. How many people would vote yes to question 1, that they're satisfied with the status quo?
Well, especially worded that way, I think it would be a low number. But yeah, I think there's a way to frame it. We really need to rock the boat, and
particularly after the
sure.
the results of the spring election, because expectations and hopes were so high that at Stampede, people were having fun and so forth. But boy, there's a lot of, a lot of frustration and built up frustration, and sort of this, like I said, in a certain sense, under the status quo, the Liberals, remember, I've said this and written this many times, the old 1980 Trudeau campaign, it wasn't their slogan, but inside it was the strategy: screw the West and we'll take the rest.
Right.
And given the differences in population and where the oil and gas is, it's pretty easy to buy a lot of votes in Ontario and Quebec with revenue transfers from Western Canada.
Do you think Danielle Smith's hands are tied at all? I mean, the Citizens Initiative legislation gives people the opportunity, right, to get a petition, shape a question. So if a petition succeeds on a separation question, do you think the Premier has enough wiggle room to say, okay, but we're going to kind of do it this way? Like, we're going to take this approach with these different questions and include that as an option. Do you think she could do that?
I don't know the new legislation on referendums well enough to know if you could actually substitute a question. Right. If a group got together the right number of signatures confirmed for a specific question, it seems to me, I assume that statute would mandate that. But the government obviously has the discretion to add more than one question, and the second question could be the two question option that I've recommended.
And in terms of some of those alternatives, like what kind of options could be on the table or could be put to the citizens, do you think?
Well, it would be a spectrum. I mean, the minimal ones would just be the changes she's already asked for, she and Moe. I think they made a list of 8 or 9. Repeal of Bill 69, get rid of the West Coast tanker ban, lift the emissions cap on the electrical system, for those types of policy changes. Those would all be very good policy changes for Alberta and I think for Canada. But a policy change is just a policy change. The next government, or even this government a year or two down the road, can change that. The next level up might be the fair deal reforms, the doing our own policing, collecting our own provincial taxes, maybe having an Alberta pension plan like Quebec. There's been some discussion of that already. The Kenney Fair Deal Panel, it recommended all of those. Ontario and Quebec already do one or the other or both. So that'd be a significant change, but it's still very much in the ballpark. It's already being done in Ontario and or Quebec. The next level would be, closer to Quebec, sovereignty association, whatever that might mean. Although the Sovereignty Act, I'd say, is a step in that direction. And then at the extreme end is outright separation. So, but that, as I said, that would give the 60% of us that aren't either pro status quo or it'd give us a chance to, I think the next election is still over 2 years away. So I think it would make for an interesting public discussion and a positive public discussion over the next 2 years. and not
Okay.
just certainly amongst Albertans, but also with Saskatchewan, with BC, and with Carney and the rest of Canada.
I was going to say, isn't it interesting because, we could flash back a quarter century ago when we were talking about the firewall letter. And you, of course, are one of the authors of that. It laid out a lot of these issues. So what do you make of the fact that, here we are 25 years later, so, still talking about these issues, but maybe now finally, I don't know, there's more seriousness to those conversations?
Well, certainly for me, there is. I've, in my most recent book, the kind of the political autobiography, Strong and Free, that I released last year, and in my public speaking, and I think in some of my op-eds, I make it very clear that despite best efforts of a lot of good people, Preston Manning, Stephen Harper, Jason Kenney, Danielle, myself, I think Alberta and Saskatchewan are worse off, more vulnerable today than we were 25 years ago. And I think, again, despite those efforts, what we tried hasn't worked in terms of making Alberta less subject to very aggressive and destructive policies from Ottawa, almost always Liberal Party policies, and focus particularly now that the trade-offs between climate change and CO2 emissions and development of oil and gas pipelines, all of that. So I've been very explicit because I'm not quite sure whether I've chosen this or fallen into it. Spoken to a number of younger audiences in the last year, and I look at them. I say, we worked hard. I think we were good. We were capable. We did, but it hasn't worked. And if you want to make Alberta less vulnerable to predatory and destructive federal policies, the beneficiaries of the status quo don't give up their advantages voluntarily. They got to be pushed. And I think the referendum, particularly the way I've suggested it, would be the kind of push that we need to move things down the road.
Well, and tell me what you think of this, because it feels like we kind of got two baskets almost. Like there's the things that we're asking Ottawa to do, we're demanding Ottawa do, that we're sort of at the mercy of whether they agree to that. But then there are things that Alberta can do on its own. Like Alberta can set up a provincial pension plan. Alberta can set up a provincial police force. Alberta can tell the feds to take a hike when it comes to pharmacare or childcare or things that are our jurisdiction. So I don't know, is it important to differentiate the two, do you think?
Well, yes. Our leverage in Ottawa is very, very small. But those half steps, whether it's policing, tax collection, pension, in other words, move things that Quebec are, that the more Alberta has autonomy in all of those areas, the more leverage it gives Alberta premiers, and not just today's premier, Daniel Smith, but premiers down the road. It gives them leverage then to, I would suggest, extract fair policies, particularly on the energy climate trade-offs down the road.
So given where things are at, where things are going at the new Alberta Next panel heading out, as you say, the Premier seems open to having some other issues go to a referendum. Are you optimistic that we are going to see that in some form?
Well, again, I read what you read. It seems to me this Alberta Prosperity Project is very well organized, well financed. They claim, what do they claim? A couple 100,000 signatures already.
Yeah.
They have lots of advertising going on. So I don't think there's much doubt that, particularly with the lower threshold for a citizen initiative referendum, the new referendum rules, that question will be on the ballot. Question is, I guess what I'm sort of lobbying for, arguing for, is a second question, which poses kind of the broader question of, are you really happy with the status quo? And if not, then how about these options? And like I said, that the next election, that would be part of the next election, 2027. It's a couple years away, and I think it'd be a good debate. Keep you busy on your podcast.
Yes, which we like. But as you say, I mean, your concern is that if it's just a separation referendum, that we lose some leverage then. If it's done, it's over.
It tells us what we already know. 20% of Albertans, I guess, are ready to leave, but 80%. So, but what I think that gives us less leverage because people in Ottawa, Ontario, Quebec say, 80% of Albertans are against separation, but it doesn't mean they're happy with the status quo. So there you have my take on it.
But as you mentioned too, I mean, there is that potential threat, though, politically to Danielle Smith, and you've been through it in Alberta politics with the divided right and the vote splitting. Are we maybe headed in that direction?
When I got taken out by the Wild Rose in 2012,
right.
And both their candidate and most of the people who worked for their candidate were people that had worked for me in 2006 in the 2006 leadership. So. Keeping left and right, keeping parties together is a big challenge. And when you don't keep them together, that can be a big price to pay.
All right. Well, interesting weeks and months ahead for sure. We'll leave it there. As mentioned, your book, it's out from last year. It's called Strong and Free, My Journey in Alberta Politics. Ted Morton, thanks so much for your insight on all of this. Appreciate you joining us here.
I enjoy talking with you again, Rob. Thank you.